Welcome to the Despicable Maine Deep Dive. Today on the show, predatory police in Despicable Maine.
Hi there. Yeah, we've received some pretty interesting material from a listener.
Definitely interesting. It's focused on policing here in Maine, and, well, the views expressed are quite strong.
They are. Our listener seems to value getting, straight to the point and shared some online discussions and personal takes on law enforcement.
And the absolute core of this, it seems, is a concept called PPP.
Right. PPP stands for predators per people, or sometimes pigs per people, depending on the source's phrasing.
Okay, so how does this PPP calculation work? It sounds kind of technical, but the source makes it seem simple.
It actually is pretty simple calculation-wise anyway. You just take the population of a town or city,
Okay.
and you divide that number by the total number of police officers they have employed there.
Got it. So population divided by cops, like figuring out pizza slices per person, but, with predators, allegedly.
Exactly. That's the analogy, I suppose. And the source argues this ratio really shows, or helps to show, the difference between policing in bigger cities compared to small towns here in Maine.
And they gave examples, right? Bangor versus Bucksport.
That's the main comparison, yeah. They point to Bangor as the larger place, and then Bucksport, a small town, where they claim the PPP is something like 1 in 300.
One police officer for every 300 residents.
Wow. That's the figure the source puts forward for Bucksport, yeah. And they use that to frame their whole argument.
So our goal today is really to unpack what this ratio is supposed to mean, according to the source,
Yeah.
and understand the perspective they're presenting about police motivations, especially using Bucksport as their case study.
Precisely. Let's dive into that PPP calculation again, just to be clear. Population divided by number of police.
Right. Simple division. And the source believes this number tells a story.
A story about whether policing is about community safety or something else. They really hammer the Bangor versus Bucksport comparison.
Now here's the logic. You have a big city like Bangor that has real crime. Then you have a little town like Bucksport that has very little real crime. Why is it that little town like Bucksport has way more police per people than a large city with real crime?
That 1 in 300 number for Bucksport is clearly key to their argument about small-town policing.
It seems to be the foundation for a lot of what follows, and what follows is pretty critical.
Yeah, this is where the source really doesn't hold back on describing policing in places like Bucksport. They use the term predators.
They do, and they go further, claiming these officers are, and this is a direct quote they relay, literally robbing people at gunpoint multiple times daily.
That's an incredibly serious accusation. Literal robbery at gunpoint, daily.
It's a very extreme claim presented in the material, yes.
How it works is like this. The first week out of each month, unless they're behind on their quota, you'll hardly see them at all. When it gets close to the end of the month, you're going to see them everywhere because now they're trying to get their quota. The last weekend of each month and the last week are the worst times to drive through these towns because you will never drive through them without seeing them trying to get you for something. What can I get them for? What can I get them for? What can I get them for is the only thing going through their head.
The source also focuses on driving through Bucksport, specifically on U.S. Route 1.
What do they say about that?
They suggest it's almost impossible to drive that route without encountering police who are actively looking for excuses to pull people over.
Excuses like what? Not actual dangerous driving.
According to the source, no. Things like having the wrong color inspection sticker, maybe a taillight that might be out, or even just the officer not liking the look of your vehicle.
So appearance-based stops, essentially,
Yeah.
or very minor infractions.
That's what the source alleges. It paints a picture of proactive enforcement for, well, seemingly trivial reasons.
And the motivation, according to this material, isn't safety.
No, the source claims it's about self-benefit for the officers or the department. They stick to that predator label, suggesting it's about extracting something from citizens.
Which leads into this idea they call the what can I get them for mentality.
Right. They speculate on the mindset of an officer watching traffic instead of hoping drivers are safe.
They're scanning for violations.
Exactly. Looking for any infraction, no matter how small, to justify a stop and presumably a ticket or fine, like they're hoping you slip up.
It's a really cynical view of police work, a stark contrast to the protect and serve motto.
When you drive past them and they're sitting on the side of the road gawking at you, what do you think they're thinking? Oh, that's just a wonderful citizen. I hope they're having a wonderful day. No. What can I get him for? What can I get him for? What can I get him? What can I get him? The only thing going through his head.
Very cynical. The source directly connects this alleged mentality back to the predator idea and suggests it's driven by revenue generation, making money off stops.
And it's not just Bucksport they single out, is it? The source mentions other towns.
Correct. They broaden the scope, providing examples of what they consider predatory practices elsewhere in Maine. Winslow comes up.
Winslow, what's the allegation there?
The claim is that Winslow police routinely run license plates of cars just driving by. And if the registered owner has a warrant,
Even if that owner isn't the one driving?
that's the allegation, they'll pull the car over based on the owner's status, regardless of who's currently driving or if any violation is occurring at that moment.
And the source says that's illegal.
They explicitly state their belief that this practice is illegal. It raises questions about probable cause, certainly.
Definitely sounds questionable if true.
I'm working at a job site in Fairfield one day, and I was talking to one guy, and I said, well, there's a lot of places available that I could rent in Winslow. And he come right back and goes, you don't want to live there. I was like, why? He goes, oh, we just fled there. He says that one of the cops kept harassing one of his young teenagers at a park. To avoid a violent confrontation with this cop for picking on his kid, he decided to leave. And his other kid was also being harassed by one of these officers in Winslow. And they literally picked up and left because they didn't want to live in Winslow. Anybody who lives here long enough is going to realize that it's nothing but a bunch of fucking predators, and you're not going to want to live there. And they're going to pick on you until you leave. And if you look over in Waterville, you could hardly find a rent anywhere in Waterville. But there's all kinds in Winslow because nobody wants to live there because of these predators.
Any other towns?
Ellsworth gets mentioned too. The accusation there involves police running plates of cars parked in private driveways.
Parked cars on private property.
Yes.
I used to hear them doing it all the time on the scanner, and I recommend everybody uses a scanner anywhere they drive in the state of Maine.
Again, the source presents this as a sort of fishing expedition, looking for reasons, maybe registration issues, warrants, anything to initiate enforcement action, even when the car is just sitting there.
So the source paints a picture of pretty widespread, questionable practices, going beyond just traffic stops.
Indeed. And their critique extends beyond police actions to the broader Maine justice system. Some really striking advice is given.
Like what?
Like, never give the state of Maine a mailing address, ever.
Why on earth not?
They allege there's a scam where simply opening mail sent by the state can be treated as an admission of guilt related to whatever the mail is about.
Opening your mail equals guilt. That sounds...
I'm telling you from experience, if you get something from the state of Maine and you don't know what it is, it ain't going to be nothing good. Write refused on it, put it back in the box. If you're dumb enough to open it, you're guilty of whatever it says.
bizarre.
It's a very unusual claim. They go so far as to call the state of Maine an extortionist corporation and advise people to never even accept mail from them.
And they believe the state tries to hide this?
Yes, the source asserts the state doesn't want citizens to know about this alleged mail-based assumption of guilt. It suggests a deep, deep distrust.
Of course they don't want you to know about it because you're cutting off their revenue stream when you know about it by not accepting their freaking scam.
They also claim Maine actively monitors citizens' finances.
How so?
Through a state fusion center, allegedly. They claim the state tracks bank account balances and even plane ticket purchases.
For what purpose?
According to the source, it's to identify people who have money enough to potentially pay court costs and fines and to prevent them from leaving the state before that money can be, well, extracted.
So the idea is the state sees people with money as revenue sources and tries to keep them from escaping potential legal costs.
That's the viewpoint presented, yes. It ties back into that theme of the state as an extortionist corporation.
It's a very dark picture they're painting.
Maine is an incredibly unique state. It had to figure out how to suck money out of people that don't have any. And it has perfected it. And predator police departments are part of this equation.
And they actually list specific police departments they label this way.
They do. The source provides an explicit list of departments they call nothing but predators.
Okay, who's on the list?
Bucksport, which we've discussed, plus Clinton, Ellsworth, Fairfield, Holton, Oakland, Princeton, Skowhegan, and Winslow.
And almost all of those right there just built multi-million-dollar brand new police departments. Can you imagine that? Yeah. And they built it with money stolen from those who are stupid enough to drive through it.
Quite a few towns named there directly.
Yes, a specific list provided in the material we reviewed.
All right. Well, that pretty much covers the main points from the listener material we received. It's certainly a perspective.
It is. We've unpacked their PPP concept, these serious allegations against specific towns like Bucksport, Winslow, and Ellsworth, and these broader, quite radical criticisms of the Maine justice system and state government itself.
The source material definitely puts forward a very strong opinion, framing law enforcement in these areas as focused primarily on, well, things other than public safety, revenue control, that sort of thing.
It's a narrative heavily centered on predation and distrust, quite different from, the community policing ideal.
If you're brave and you're going to drive through one of these towns, keep this in mind. Unless something has changed, your chances of being a victim are less at the beginning of the month than at the end of the month. When they come up to the side of your car at a traffic stop, think of the number 104. That is the maximum IQ that officer has. And the 104 number is very important. They want people who will blindly follow orders and have no sympathy for others. Also keep in mind that the officer may have a horrific home life where they may be on antidepressants to deal with it that occasionally create suicidal and homicidal thoughts. If they approach your car and they look like they just come out of a war zone in Baghdad, be very, very careful. These people can be extremely unstable, especially if you even remotely challenge their fake made-up authority. With that being said, let's deep dive into this a little further.
The source alleges you'll find multiple officers, these predators, hunting people is the term used.
Hunting for what, though?
Minor stuff. Really minor, like having the wrong color sticker on your license plate.
Wow.
And the language gets very sharp here. It's described as literally robbing people at gunpoint multiple times daily over these tiny victimless things.
So the argument is that it's not about safety, it's about revenue, finding excuses to ticket.
That's exactly the assertion, that the term predator is used because they're seen as hunting for revenue, not protecting citizens.
This framing sets up a really stark contrast they draw later.
Yeah, the carjacker versus the police officer analogy, It's definitely provocative.
It is. The sources use it to make a point about honesty and perception during what they frame as two types of robbery.
Okay, so let's walk through it. Scenario 1, the carjacker points a gun, demands the keys.
Pretty clear-cut situation.
Right. The source argues both people involved know what's happening. It's immoral, it's robbery, threat of violence is obvious, no pretense.
The carjacker isn't pretending it's for your own good.
Exactly. They know the risks, too. If the victim fights back, it's part of the game, almost. The source calls this interaction, despite its illegality, straightforward, even open and honest about the fundamental nature of the act.
Okay, so honesty in the dishonesty, in a sense?
Sort of, yeah. Now, contrast that with the police stop scenario.
Like rolling a stop sign late at night, maybe?
Perfect example. No one around, you don't come to a full, complete stop, then bam, red and blue lights. Here's the crux of the delusion argument, as the sources put it. The officer, they claim, sees this as a totally legitimate legal opportunity to, quote, rob you via ticket. They genuinely believe their actions are righteous and different from the carjackers.
Because it's sanctioned by law. Because they wear a uniform.
Precisely. The law says stop, you didn't fully stop, therefore the ticket is justified, end of story. Harm doesn't enter the equation.
But the driver's perception, according to these sources,
They see a, quote, delusional dude in a costume, using the implied threat of those flashing lights' state power to take their money for something harmless.
so a fundamental disconnect in perceived legitimacy.
Absolutely. The argument is even well-meaning officers are so indoctrinated they can't see it from the driver's perspective. They think the law automatically makes the action wrong, regardless of actual consequence.
This leads into the broader idea of indoctrination and, well, statism, as one source calls it.
Yeah, the belief is that police are so deep in this legal robbery mindset. They're dishonest, maybe even without realizing it, like denying the inherent threat in flashing lights.
This is where that 104 number comes in.
They just say they're doing their job enforcing the law.
Right.
This is where that 104 number comes in.
The sources paint them as unthinking, order-obeying thugs of the state who, crucially, believe they are the good guys.
This is where that 104 number comes in.
It sounds like the sources are arguing it's a kind of constructed reality.
They use a pretty wild analogy, a tribe sacrificing someone to a volcano god to make the weather good.
Okay. Where's that going?
The point is, within that belief system, sacrificing someone is logical, even necessary. Anyone questioning it seems crazy to them.
This is where that 104 number comes in.
The police, supposedly, are similarly baffled why their victims, the people getting tickets for minor things, are upset.
Because the police genuinely believe they're upholding order, like appeasing the volcano god.
That's the parallel being drawn. It feeds into this just doing my job, following orders, going down the checklist mentality.
And this alleged mindset leads to...
Does anybody see a pattern yet with the number 104?
What the sources call contempt for their victims and victim blaming. You broke the rule, therefore you deserve the penalty. End of discussion. No empathy.
It's a very adversarial picture being painted.
Hugely. And circling back to Maine specifically,
Let's do a quick recap.
the claims are relentless. Police as predators, actively hunting people.
That phrase, literally robbing people at gunpoint multiple times daily for minor stuff like stickers, really stands out.
It does, and actions like running plates constantly. The sources say that proves the intent isn't protection, but finding any excuse to pull someone over, suggesting it's almost by design to ensure blind obedience and lack of critical thought or empathy.
With a very harsh assessment. Does it offer specific examples beyond Bucksport?
Oh yeah. Winslow PD gets called out, allegedly running plates of passing cars and pulling them over if the registered owner has a warrant, even if someone else is driving and committed no violation. The source flat out calls this illegal.
That would definitely be questionable grounds for a stop, if true.
Then Ellsworth PD, supposedly running plates of cars parked in private driveways.
It's just parked there.
Apparently. Again, the implication is just fishing for violations. It leads to this extreme advice in the source. Never give Maine a mailing address.
Why?
Because, the claim goes, if they mail you something, a notice, whatever, and you open it, you've acknowledged their system and are basically admitting guilt for whatever they've decided you did. The advice is literally never accept mail from the extortionist corporation like state of Maine.
Wow, that's a profound level of distrust.
It gets even deeper. There's a warning that Maine State Fusion Center monitors bank accounts and plane ticket purchases.
For what purpose?
2 alleged reasons: targeting people who seem able to afford court costs and preventing people seen as a lost revenue stream from leaving the state.
That's a very serious accusation of surveillance and manipulation.
Yeah. And then there's that list. Bucksport, Clinton, Ellsworth, Fairfield, Holton, Oakland, Princeton, Skowhegan, Winslow, all labeled nothing but predators.
And they used the stolen loot to build themselves brand new predator departments. Just look it up if you don't believe me.
A blanket condemnation of multiple departments.
Now, another angle from the sources shifts focus slightly, arguing that police are fundamentally cowards.
Cowards? How so? Contrasting with TV portrayals.
Exactly. Moving away from the heroic image.
Focusing on easy targets, maybe?
That's the argument. Then there's an incident involving the writer's daughter and friend supposedly illegally detained and harassed just for walking home late at night. This feeds into the road pirates idea. Traffic stops for tiny things are just fishing for excuses to steal money.
So avoiding real danger, focusing on revenue or minor control issues.
That's the claim. It extends to active shooter situations, suggesting police often prioritize their own safety over intervention.
A very controversial point.
Definitely. And they bring up gun handling. Responsible gun owners are taught never to point a gun unless ready to use deadly force. But the sources claim cops violate this constantly out of fear, pointing guns at non-threatening people. Videos are cited as evidence.
So fear obligating training and judgment.
Yes, leading to accusations of being trigger-happy. There's even a claim about an alleged unwritten policy. If one officer shoots someone, multiple others should also fire.
Why would they do that?
The source suggests 2 reasons: to make it harder to prosecute the first officer, and, chillingly, to ensure the victim is silenced. It's framed as protecting the gang.
That's a disturbing allegation of coordinated action.
And it connects to other claims, like cops shooting dogs out of fear, or a statistic suggesting police shoot the wrong person more often than armed citizens because they're paranoid and quick to shoot.
The cowardice argument seems tied to self-preservation and maybe an overestimation of threats.
That seems to be the link. The source asks, why don't we see videos of cops arresting other cops for clear wrongdoing? Why do videos allegedly show multiple officers beating someone who isn't resisting, with others just standing by or joining in?
They frame it as a gang mentality, protecting their own above all else.
Exactly. and the underlying motivation proposed for joining the force. Not service, but being a coward who feels weak and wants to feel power.
This is where that 104 number comes in.
That's a psychological argument about the type of person attracted to the job according to this view.
Which ties into another major theme, the expectation of subservience.
That people should grovel.
Pretty much like subjects before the guards of the king. The sources argue police expect absolute obedience and deference.
How does that connect back to the carjacker comparison?
Well, the carjacker doesn't expect you to respect them or approve of their actions. They just want the car. But the police, operating under this alleged delusion of righteousness and authority, expect you to accept their actions as legitimate and treat them with deference.
So the flashing lights aren't just a signal to stop, they're a command demanding a certain attitude.
That's the claim. If you don't show enough subservience, if you just talk normally, you get the "why are you giving me" attitude response.
Implying that normal interaction is seen as disrespect.
Yes. The sources argue police training reinforces this: how to dominate, control the interaction, dictate how people should behave, lie down, hands up when you can speak.
And this links back to the motivation for joining, the desire for power and control.
That's the connection made.
This is where that 104 number comes in.
Questioning their authority, even calmly, gets you labeled a criminal or bad guy because it's seen as disrespect. It circles back to that contempt for their victims idea. If you don't bow down, you're just a silly fringe weirdo.
So the expectation of subservience stems directly from their belief in their own inherent authority.
According to these sources, yes. Which leads to the point about police priorities.
Self-protection over public safety.
That's the argument. Protecting themselves, their gang, and the interests of the state, often fueled by that delusion of righteousness rather than genuine public safety.
How does that manifest?
Well, reinforcing points we've touched on. The predators, hunting people, the "what can I get them for" mindset. Running plates not for safety, but for stops.
The robbing people at gunpoint for minor infractions.
Exactly. And the alleged monitoring of finances and travel that's framed as being about revenue and control, not safety.
The cowardice argument also fits here, prioritizing officer safety above all, protecting fellow officers even when wrong.
Right, like that alleged policy of multiple officers shooting someone already shot. It's presented as pure gang-like self-protection.
And the desire for power and control is seen as a self-interested motivation, not public service.
Correct. The sources argue the delusion allows them to believe they're doing legitimate law enforcement, while the reality, from this perspective, is state-sanctioned robbery, control, and self-preservation.
Hence the unthinking, order-obeying thugs of the state label again.
Yeah. The claim is that protecting the public is just a cover story.
This all seems to culminate in a critique of police training and the core belief in authority itself.
It does. The idea is that training is about domination, and it works because recruits already believe in this concept of authority.
What kind of training specifics are mentioned?
Methods to make people bow, lie down, follow commands instantly, control when and how they speak. The sources claim this training fundamentally changes people, reinforcing that desire for power that maybe led them there in the first place.
And authority itself is framed negatively.
As the most dangerous superstition. It's seen as the mental switch that allows someone to engage in acts that resemble robbery or assault, but believe they are legitimate because they have the badge, the uniform, the authority.
The brain-dead automaton idea, blindly following orders.
Right. Indoctrinated to the point they can't see themselves as the aggressors, even when initiating force or threats over minor issues. The worldview gets flipped upside down and backwards, where the person being ticketed or arrested is the villain for resisting or questioning.
And the expectation of groveling is a symptom of this, believing they have a higher status.
That's exactly it. Why else demand extreme deference or interpret normal conversation as attitude? It all stems from that belief in their own special authority, leading to that alleged contempt for victims.
So, wrapping this up, the sources paint a really consistent, if deeply critical, picture.
Yeah, very consistent. Predatory policing, especially highlighted with those main examples like the PPP in Bucksport and the specific department accusations, driven by what's called delusion, a thirst for power, and prioritizing self-interest or state interest over actual public safety.
The core argument seems to be that many police actions, particularly around minor infractions, are essentially immoral robbery disguised as law enforcement, backed by the threat of state violence.
And that this is enabled by a deep-seated belief in their own authority, which leads them to expect subservience and react with hostility or contempt towards anyone who doesn't comply or questions them.
It's a powerful and obviously very controversial critique presented in these materials.
It definitely is. Thanks for tuning into the Despicable Maine Deep Dive. Remember, the United States has been hijacked. So soon, living in the United States will be theft of your life.